I took early retirement 2 months ago. They say it was voluntary, but if you read between the lines, the transfer, the psych eval, the months of leave before I resigned, you'd see the truth. I've never told anyone what really happened in Barley Hill. Not the chief superintendent. Not the shrink they assigned me. Not even my wife, who thinks it was just burnout. It wasn't burnout. I know what I saw. And more importantly, I know what I heard in that cellar, but I'll start at the beginning. Barley Hill is a speck on the map in Northumberland. 2 rows of cottages, 1 pub, 1 post office, and fields that go on forever. The kind of place where time folds in on itself. I was stationed nearby in Hexham and sent out to assist local Plod when a girl went missing. Her name was Abigail Shaw, 12 years old. Disappeared on a Tuesday afternoon between school and home. She should have walked back with her friend Lucy, but told her she was cutting through the woods to take a shortcut, except there was no shortcut. Just miles of dense forest and farmland. Her parents were frantic, understandably. I met them the night she vanished. Good people, salt-of-the-earth types. Mr. Shaw was shaking so bad he couldn't hold his tea. Mrs. Shaw kept glancing at the clock every few seconds like if she stared hard enough, time would reverse. The Barley Hill. Constable, a man named Pritchard, was already out of his depth. No CCTV in the village, no reports of strangers, no signs of struggle. I took over coordination and brought in dogs and drones by the next morning. We combed every square meter of woodland for 3 days. Nothing. Not a footprint. Not a thread of clothing. She'd vanished like smoke. Then, on the 4th day, we found something. It was a dog walker about 2 miles from the village, near an abandoned farmstead, old place called Greaves Orchard. The dog had gone ballistic near the collapsed barn and started digging at the earth. That's where we found the ribbon. Pink, satin, with a tiny silver bell. Abigail's mother confirmed it was hers. The barn itself was unsafe. Roof half caved. Floor rotted. But below it, there was a trap door, sealed with rusted iron bolts. And this is where things get odd. The floor above that trapdoor hadn't collapsed. There was no way the dog could have smelled anything through solid oak beams and a foot of earth. But it did, and it led us to that exact spot like it had been called there. We broke the lock. The air that came up smelled like old stone and wet iron. We descended. The cellar was far too large, carved into the bedrock with old tools. Pritchard said the farmhouse had no records of underground storage, no history, no maps, not even local gossip. But here it was, 15 feet underground with stone shelves, iron hooks, and something that looked a lot like restraints bolted to the wall. We searched every inch, no girl, just one small shoe, tucked behind a broken crate, and carved into the wall 6 feet up, alive, written in chalk. Still fresh. That word stayed with me. We brought in forensics. They lifted Abigail's prints off the shoe. The ribbon, too. But nothing else. No DNA, no signs of anyone else. We interviewed every villager twice. I walked the woods alone some nights. Flashlight in one hand, recorder in the other. That's when it started. At first, it was small things. My mobile would turn on in the middle of the night and start recording. Voice memos I didn't make, just static and faint whispers I couldn't make out. Then came the voice. 3 times over the next week, I woke to a faint knock on my guest. House door at precisely 2:11 a.m. Each time, I opened it to find no one. On the 3rd night, I stayed up and recorded the hallway. When I reviewed the footage the next morning, my stomach turned. At 2:11 a.m., the camera shook slightly, then captured. My own voice, whispering, "She's in the orchard." Except I never said that. I didn't tell anyone. Didn't want to be pulled off the case. Instead, I went back to Greaves Orchard. Daylight this time. I paced the area around the barn. Found nothing. But the feeling, that pressure behind the eyes, that wrongness in the air, it stayed with me. The next night I got a call. An old woman named Mags Willoughby. She lived alone at the edge of the village nearest to the orchard. She'd seen something, she said. Her voice trembled over the line. 2 nights ago, she told me when I got there. I saw a girl running across the field. Did you recognize her? She looked like the Shaw girl, but she wasn't right. I frowned. Not right how? She was barefoot, mud up to her knees, but her clothes weren't torn. And her face... Mags hesitated. It didn't look scared. It looked calm, like she was walking in her sleep. Where did she go? Toward the orchard, toward the barn. I stayed out there until dawn. Nothing. A week passed. The official search was scaled down. The press moved on, but I didn't. The case got inside me. I barely slept. 8 standing up. My wife said I talked in my sleep, muttering about cellars and chalk and ribbons. Then one night, a storm rolling in over the moors, I returned to Greaves' orchard one last time. The barn was creaking in the wind. The trees swayed like they were trying to whisper to each other. I descended the cellar steps with my torch and recorder. Everything was as we'd left it, empty. But the word alive was gone, scrubbed clean. In its place, one word, newly written in shaky chalk. Colder. I turned, heart pounding, a sound behind me. Soft, delicate, a giggle. I spun and caught it in the beam. A girl, pale, dirty feet, wearing a nightgown. Abigail? I whispered. She just stared at me, smiling. I reached out, but she stepped backward into the darkness and vanished. I ran to the spot. Nothing. Just stone wall. I don't know how long I stood there, torch shaking. Eventually, I left. Didn't sleep that night. Didn't go back the next day. They found her 3 days later, wandering along the roadside near Hayden Bridge. Disoriented. Clothes. Clean. No bruises, no injuries. Dehydrated, but otherwise unharmed. The doctor said she'd been fed recently. No signs of trauma. She didn't remember anything. She just kept repeating the same thing. The man in the cellar was nice. They assumed it was a coping mechanism, a way to process fear, but I knew better. I asked to see her one last time. Off the record, I just wanted to ask a single question. I sat across from her in the hospital room. She looked at me calmly, swinging her legs off the side of the bed. Abigail, I said, was the man in the cellar old or young? She tilted her head. He didn't have a face. They closed the case. Everyone celebrated a miracle. The girl who came back. But I know what I saw in that cellar, and I know what I heard. Because the night after she was found, I played one of the voice memos from my phone. It was my voice again, muttering, over and over. She's not the same. She's not the same. She's not the same. Then silence. Then a child's voice, soft, like it was speaking right next to the microphone. Neither are you. Enjoy another amazing story. I won't give my name or the city. Let's just say it's an old working-class neighborhood in a city that's seen better days. The kind with old brick buildings crammed together, streets barely wide enough for one car to squeeze through. I'd lived in this particular building pretty much my whole life, or at least as long as I can remember. It was an old walk-up, definitely older than me, older than my dad. Cracked plaster, stairs worn unevenly, lights that flickered on their own schedule and water pressure that was more of a suggestion than a guarantee, standard stuff for the area. The building had its quirks, things we'd all gotten used to. You'd hear odd thumps in the night. The hallway light on our floor would sometimes flare bright, then dim for no reason, the cat belonging to a woman. On the second floor would occasionally hiss at one specific spot on the third-floor landing and refuse to pass. You know, the kind of stuff people chalk up to the house settling or old wiring or whatever explanation lets you sleep at night. Life's got enough real scares, right? But all those little oddities were one thing. Apartment 4B, directly across. The narrow hall from ours was something else entirely. That apartment, it was sealed. Sealed shut since before my family moved in. We're talking over 20 years, locked with a heavy-duty, rust-caked padlock on a thick hasp, bolted into the door and frame. The wooden door itself was weathered, paint peeling, showing the scars of time and damp, but it was firmly closed, and nobody ever went near it. When we first moved in, my dad, God rest his soul, asked the old man who owned the building then, about 4B. Why was it locked up tight, not rented out like all the others? The landlord at the time was elderly even then, but still sharp. His face clouded over, and his voice, usually gentle, became stern. That apartment is my business, son, and I don't keep it locked to rent it out. You mind yours. That was enough, for no one in the building to ever bring it up with him again. The old landlord himself was a bit of a recluse, lived in the ground floor unit, rarely spoke, barely seen. When he got too frail, his son started coming by to look after him and, eventually, the building. But even the son clammed up if you asked about 4B. That apartment was a source of silent, creeping dread for all of us on the 4th floor, especially us, right opposite. Why? The sounds. The sounds that came from it. Not loud, startling noises. No, these were quiet, faint but persistent and deeply unsettling. Sometimes you'd hear a soft scratching, like a trapped animal from the other side of the door. Other times, a low, broken murmuring, like someone whispering just below the threshold of understanding. And then there was the sound that unnerved me the most, a faint, electrical hum or a deep, resonant thrumming like a massive, distant engine. A sound that had no business being in a sealed apartment, we were pretty sure had its utilities disconnected decades ago. These sounds weren't constant. They had a strange rhythm, usually late at night or in those dead quiet hours just before dawn when the city finally holds its breath. At first, we told ourselves it was just sound carrying from other apartments, through the old walls. But over time, focusing, we became certain. The source was 4B. Beyond the sounds, other things were linked to that apartment. The patch of hallway, floor directly in front of its door, for instance, was always colder than the rest of the landing. Even in the height of summer, when the building felt like an oven, if you stood there, you'd feel a distinct, unsettling chill, like a pocket of winter air. The stray cats that sometimes snuck into the building to sleep on the stairs, they'd never go near that spot. They'd approach, then stop, arch their backs, and either turn around or skirt wide around it, hurrying past as if spooked. My mom would always mutter a prayer and sprinkle salt in front of our own door, sometimes reciting scripture a little louder when the sounds from 4B were more noticeable. My dad tried to reassure us, saying, "It's just your imagination," or probably rats or old pipes, even though he knew and we knew that was nonsense. No rats could make those specific sounds, and a sealed apartment wouldn't have active pipes behaving like that. As I got older, into my teens and then my 20s, 4B became more of an obsession. The curiosity was eating me alive. What was in there? Why was the original landlord and then his son so adamant about keeping it sealed? And those damned sounds? I started paying closer attention, trying to decipher them. Was the whispering in any recognizable language? Was the scratching rhythmic? Did the hum fluctuate? Sometimes, late at night, after my parents were asleep, I'd crack open our door and stand in the darkened hallway just listening. Once I pressed my ear against the cold, ancient wood of 4B's door. The chill I mentioned seeped right through my clothes, and I heard something like a clock ticking, but incredibly slow and erratic. Tick, then a long silence, then 2 quick ticks, then an even longer silence, followed by a sound like a deep, shuddering intake of breath. Then the ticking resumed. My heart hammered against my ribs. I scrambled back to our apartment, slamming our door, convinced an eye had been watching me through some unseen crack in 4B. I started asking the older tenants, the ones who'd been there even longer than us. One elderly woman on the 2nd floor, a tiny lady who'd lived in the building her whole life, lowered her voice and glanced around conspiratorially. "My boy," she said, her accent thick. "That apartment, it was closed up even before the old man bought this place. They say people lived there, then vanished, just gone. And they say, God forgive me, they say it was touched by something not good. When he bought it, he left it as it was. Said no one should ever open it, so the badness inside doesn't spread." Her words chilled me more than any draft from under that door. That old? And what did she mean? Badness that spreads? Our next-door neighbor on our floor, a kind but jumpy woman, told me she sometimes smelled a strange odor seeping from under 4B's door. Not just must or damp, but something else, like ancient dust mixed with the scent of burnt wood or a strange, cloying incense, an odor that made her feel sick. She said her youngest son was playing in the hall once and just froze in front of 4B, staring. When she asked what he was looking at, he said he saw a faint light coming from under the door. She, of course, freaked out, dragged him inside, and forbade him from playing near 4B ever again. All this just fueled my morbid curiosity and my growing dread. I became fixated. I'd wait for the sounds, trying to understand them. I'd watch the door as if expecting it to spontaneously reveal its secrets. I started dreaming about it. Horrible, oppressive dreams. I once dreamt I was standing before 4B, and the door creaked open on its own, revealing pitch blackness within. But I could feel something approaching from that darkness, something vast and shapeless. I woke up ice cold, drenched in sweat. The old landlord eventually passed. His son inherited the building. The son was a bit more approachable than his father, more willing to engage. One day I gathered my courage. Along with 2 other guys from the building who were just as uneasy as I was, we decided to talk to him, to finally get some answers. We went down to his father's old apartment, now his office. He opened the door looking surprised. We sat in the small, cluttered living room that still smelled faintly of old books and pipe tobacco. We carefully broached the subject of 4B, the sounds, our concerns. At first, he tried to brush it off. Just like his father, old building, overactive imaginations. But when we persisted, detailing the specific sounds, the cold, the smell, his face changed. The unease was clear. He lowered his voice, glancing around as if afraid of being overheard. Look, guys, my father made me swear never to talk about 4B, never to go near it. He inherited the building with that apartment already sealed. The previous owner warned him, told him never to open it, never to rent it. Said it wasn't like other apartments. That it was connected to something else. Something very old and very wrong. My father was terrified of it. He said keeping it locked was what protected all of us. I leaned forward. Connected to what? What do you mean connected to something else? He shook his head. I don't know specifics. All I know is he feared it profoundly. He said the sounds, they were from things not of this world. And he said there were certain nights of the year when the sounds got worse, the cold in front of the door became biting, and on those nights absolutely no one should go near it. His words were like gasoline on a fire. My curiosity piqued, but a new, deeper layer of fear was settling in. What was this something else? What about these certain nights? Months passed. Things stayed the same. Faint sounds, the cold spot, a low hum of anxiety among the tenants. Until the event that changed everything. The landlord's son, despite his father's warnings, was struggling. The building was old, repairs were constant, and he wasn't a wealthy man. He started talking about 4B. Maybe, just maybe, he could open it, clean it out, rent it. The money would be a lifesaver. We heard whispers of this and grew genuinely alarmed. We tried to reason with him, reminding him of his father's words, the warnings. But desperation, or maybe just the lure of potential income, was a powerful motivator. He said he'd get someone to check it out properly, maybe even get a priest or someone to bless it before he did anything drastic. He had to find a solution for this dead space. And so, a few days later, he did. He brought a handyman, a burly guy with a crowbar and a power drill. It was a Friday afternoon. Most people were home from work or out. I was at my window, watching the hallway through a crack in the curtains, my stomach in knots. The handyman seemed unfazed, probably thought it was just an old stuck door. The landlord looked nervous. They started on the padlock with the drill. It was rusted solid, clinging to the doorframe with grim determination. The shriek of the drill bit into metal echoed through the stairwell, loud and jarring. After several minutes of grinding and a final loud crack, the padlock broke and clattered to the floor. The door was now held only by whatever internal locks it might have had, or just by age and inertia. The landlord looked at the handyman, who just shrugged. The landlord took a breath and pushed the door. It swung inward slowly, with a groan of ancient protesting wood. It opened just a sliver, maybe 6 inches, and from that opening, at first, nothing. Just darkness. But then suddenly, all ambient sound ceased. The distant city hum, the murmur of traffic, the kids playing in the street below, even the hum of the refrigerator in my own apartment. Everything went silent. A profound, unnatural silence, like the world had been put on mute. And it wasn't, just the silence. The air itself changed. It became heavy, and a biting, unnatural cold billowed out from that narrow gap. Not the localized chill we were used to, but a penetrating, deathly cold that seemed to suck the warmth from your bones. The light in the hallway, the weak afternoon sun filtering through the stairwell window, began to dim, as if a storm cloud had instantly blotted out the sky. This all happened in seconds. The landlord and the handyman froze, staring at that dark sliver. I stood paralyzed behind my curtains, feeling the same crushing silence, the same invasive cold, watching the light fade. And from within that 6-inch gap, something began to emerge. Not smoke, not fog. It was like fine, black ash, impossibly soft, drifting out in slow, deliberate eddies, as if dancing in an air that had no current. A cold ash, matte black, utterly devoid of any sheen. It began to coat the floor in front of 4B, then a sound. The only sound to break that suffocating silence. Not loud, but impossibly deep and sorrowful. A sound like a long, drawn-out cosmic sigh, or the final exhalation of a dying universe. A sound filled with all the despair, all the finality, all the loss in existence. A sound that felt like it was pulling the soul from my body. The handyman let out a choked scream and stumbled back, dropping his crowbar with a clang that was horribly loud in the returning yet still muffled soundscape. He turned and fled, scrambling down the stairs, his footsteps echoing wildly. The landlord stood rooted to the spot, his face a mask of horror, eyes wide, staring into the gap as the black ash began to settle on his clothes and hair. I couldn't watch anymore. I slammed my door, bolted it, and retreated to the furthest corner of my bedroom, hands clamped over my ears, trying to block out that soul-crushing sigh, eyes squeezed shut against the image of that encroaching darkness. But the silence, the wrong silence, was still there, a pressure against my eardrums. The cold was seeping under my door. I don't know how long I stayed like that. Minutes, maybe an hour. Gradually, I sensed the oppressive weight lifting. The normal sounds of the building and the city began to filter back in, faint at first, then growing to their usual levels. The terrifying sigh was gone. Gathering every shred of courage, I crept out of my room. I went to my front door and peered through the peephole. The landlord was still in the hallway, alone, leaning against the opposite wall, his face pale as death. He was staring at the door of 4B, still ajar by that same 6 inches, the black ash thick on the floor before it. I unlocked my door and stepped out. He was trembling. What was that? What's in there? I whispered. He looked at me with vacant eyes, his voice a ragged whisper. Not an apartment. There's nothing, just void, cold. And the end. Everything ends. In there. He said nothing more. I helped him stumble back to his own apartment downstairs and sat him in a chair. I went back up, drawn by that terrible, cursed curiosity. The 6-inch gap remained. The cold was still intense, and as I approached, the ambient sounds of the hallway seemed to recede again, as if being absorbed. I stood before the opening and peered inside. At first, only darkness. A blackness deeper and more absolute than any night I'd ever known. But as my eyes struggled to adjust, I realized it wasn't just darkness. It was emptiness, an infinite void. No walls, no ceiling, no floor. Just an endless expanse of cold, silent black, and in that blackness, distant, faint pinpricks of light, like stars. But these stars were dying. I watched, horrified, as they slowly, inexorably faded, one by one, like guttering candles. I was witnessing the heat death of a universe, the final extinguishment of all light and energy. I saw, or felt, the very last speck of light wink out. And then, nothing. Absolute black, absolute cold, absolute silence. The cessation of all being. Oblivion. That silent, static view was more terrifying than any monster, any tangible threat. This wasn't the horror of something attacking you. It was the horror of ultimate, inevitable annihilation, the terror of eternal, empty, cold nothingness. I felt a sense of insignificance, of cosmic futility, so profound it threatened to shatter my sanity. My existence, humanity, the earth, the sun, the galaxies, all just a fleeting flicker, destined for this. Don't know how long I stared. Seconds, perhaps. But it felt like an eternity of utter despair. Then I couldn't take it. I recoiled, stumbling back, hitting the opposite wall, feeling as if my soul was being siphoned away. I looked at that narrow opening, like the maw of some cosmic beast, waiting to swallow what little light and life remained in our world. In that moment, I knew. 4B wasn't just haunted. It wasn't just a place of ancient evil. It was a window, a viewport onto the end of all things. Perhaps time flowed differently in there, or perhaps it was a fixed point, forever displaying that final silent scene. I didn't know, and I didn't want to. All I knew was I had to get away. I ran back into my apartment, grabbed a bag, threw in whatever essentials I could find, and fled. Out of the apartment, out of the building, out of the neighborhood without a backward glance. I walked until my legs gave out, then caught a bus, any bus, heading anywhere else. I'm in a motel room now, somewhere anonymous, hands shaking as I type this. That vision is seared into my brain. The blackness, the cold, the dying stars, the feeling of absolute terminal finality. I'm terrified of the dark now, of silence. I'm afraid to close my eyes because I see it all again. I don't know what the landlord did. Did he manage to close the door? Did he sell the building? Is he even still there? I don't know, and I don't want to. The handyman who ran, the other tenants, I can't think about them. All that matters now is how I can possibly go on, living after seeing that. How can I return to any semblance of normal life, knowing what the end truly looks like? Knowing that an old wooden door in a crumbling tenement in a forgotten part of a city opens onto absolute oblivion? I'm writing. This is a warning, I guess. Or maybe just to get it out, to feel like I'm not the only one who knows, to feel slightly less insane. If you live in an old place, if there's a locked room nobody ever talks about, if you hear strange sounds or feel unexplained cold, please just leave it alone. Walk away. Curiosity won't just kill you. It can kill your soul by showing you the bleak, cold, silent truth waiting for us all. God help us. I really don't know what else to say. Thanks for diving into this story with me. Don't miss out on the next one. Hit that subscribe button, give this video a big thumbs up, and drop a comment below with your thoughts. I'd love to hear what you think.